So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It is really, really great to see you all. I'm Donna Berman. I'm the Executive Director of the Charter Oak Cultural Center. And we are going to sit at the feet and learn from one of the most brilliant thinkers of our time tonight. How lucky are we? Tonight's event is part of our 24th annual celebration of Jewish arts and culture. And we are grateful to all of our sponsors, the Samuel Roskin Trust, Harry E. Goldfarb Family Foundation, Rona Golub Fund, Laz Parking, Carolyn and Stuart Bernstein, Barbara and Jack Bleckner, Margot Lynn Abruzzo, and Fran and Alan Maltz. Before I introduce Dr. Eisler, let me just say a little bit about Charter Oak and what events are coming up. Charter Oak Cultural Center is a multicultural arts center doing the work of social justice through the arts in several ways. We host thought-provoking events like tonight's conversation, performances and exhibits, and no one is ever turned away for lack of funds because we believe that the arts are a human right, not a luxury. Our City School of the Arts provides over 1,000 Hartford children with a free arts education, and our 3 Beat of the Street programs offer educational and employment opportunities to people in the homeless community. And we are presently, by the way, running a food drive to help support those we serve with extra food during this interruption in SNAP benefits. And you can go on our website and get details about how to donate if you'd like to do that. If our work touches you and you'd like to support it, we would be so grateful for any donation. Every dollar counts, especially now as the need for our services grows and prices continue to go up and philanthropic resources are fewer. So here's what we have coming up program-wise. On December 4th, Sari McConnell, fundraising consultant, a lovely woman, I bat mitzvahed her, truly I did, will be giving a talk called Navigating the 2025 Tax Law, Tax Smart Guidance for Charitable Giving. Sari is wonderful and smart, and we have to be very conscious of what these new laws mean for us and the causes that matter to us. On December 11th, Fabiana Rodriguez will be presenting a lecture on the arts and social justice and their connection as part of Charter Oak's Ada Maria Isazi Diaz Justice Institute, which showcases the work of Latinx women scholars and activists. Fabiana is amazing and inspiring, and really you won't want to miss that lecture. And every Wednesday, we hold at 12 o'clock, we hold a discussion group that anyone can join at any time. We are focusing on the brilliant book, Ordinary Notes by Christina Sharp. And again, the discussions are designed in such a way that new people can just jump in at any time. I promise you that's true. It is a marvelous book, Ordinary Notes, and delicious, life-changing conversation about how we can effectively and genuinely confront and heal the legacy of slavery and racism. And we'd love you to be a part of that. And speaking of marvelous, life-changing books, we have the honor of spending the next hour or so with one of the most visionary leaders I know, Dr. Riane Eisler. Dr. Eisler's bio is unbelievable what she's accomplished in her life. And her book, The Chalice and the Blade, absolutely changed, I was just telling her, the trajectory of my life and my rabbinate. Reading it was like an intellectual earthquake, inspiring me to rethink old ideas and envision new worlds. I feel that way about all her work. Her newest book, Nurturing Our Humanity, is the antidote to the feeling of hopelessness that is so pervasive right now. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Eisler. She is the recipient of many honors, such as the Distinguished Peace Leadership Award earlier given to the Dalai Lama, and internationally known for her groundbreaking contributions as a systems scientist, futurist, attorney, and cultural historian. She is author of many books, including The Chalice and the Blade, now in its 57th US printing and 30 foreign editions. The Real Wealth of Nations, hailed by, I'm just going to let somebody in here, hailed by Nobel Peace Laureate Desmond Tutu as, quote, a template for the better world we have been so urgently seeking. Not everybody has an endorsement by Desmond Tutu. And Nurturing Our Humanity, Oxford University Press, 2019, co-authored with Douglas P. Fry. Dr. Eisler's innovative whole systems research offers new perspectives and practical tools for constructing a less violent, more egalitarian, gender-balanced, and environmentally sustainable future. during these very difficult days that we're living through, a lot of people are saying, what can we do? What can we do? We have the person here who's going to tell us what we can do. Dr. Eisler is president of the Center for Partnership Systems, which provides practical applications of her work, and editor-in-chief of the online interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies, published at the University of Minnesota. She keynotes conferences worldwide, has taught at many universities, has written hundreds of articles, and contributes to both scholarly and popular books, pioneered the application of human rights standards to women and children, has addressed the UN General Assembly, and consults to businesses and governments on the partnership model introduced by her work. And for more information, you can go to the website for the center. It's centerforpartnership.org. And it is a marvelous website. You will feel hope about the world. So I encourage you to visit that website. And it's just amazing what you have accomplished in your life. It is amazing that we get to learn from you tonight. It is my absolute pleasure and privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Riane Eisler.
It's wonderful to be with you. And I was with you before, but it's been that's what we figured, about 5 years shortly. So it's time for me to return. And especially at this time when so many of us are struggling, with lack of hope. And it's true that we have hope. So thank you for inviting me, Donna.
It's just my pleasure. And what we're going to do, everybody, is I'm going to ask Dr. Eisler some questions, and then we'll open the floor to you to ask her questions. That sound okay?
Sounds perfect. I, as you know, am fresh from a summit we just held called Peace Begins at Home, to connect the dots between what is conventionally called domestic violence. I prefer the term family violence, because we've been so used to dismissing domestic violence, women, children, oh, well, but we had 2,000 people registered. It was just an amazing, we had speakers from 26 countries, and it was about connecting the dots, which is what my work is about, and I will tell you more about it.
Great. Yes, thank you. I want to just invite everybody, if you'd like, I mean, you can put it in gallery mode and see everybody, but you can also put it in speaker mode, or you can pin me and Dr. Eisler, and then you can just see us, whatever is comfortable for you. So, you ready?
Ready.
Questions? Okay, here we go. Can you tell us a little bit about your life, about yourself, and what inspired you to do the work you've done your entire life of envisioning a more just and equitable world?
Well, as I have shared many times, my passion for this work, and I have a great deal of passion for it, is really rooted in my early childhood as a refugee from the Holocaust, from Europe, from Vienna, where I was born with my parents. And it was a very traumatic experience. So, but at the same time, on Kristallnacht, I witnessed both really cruelty and violence, but I also witnessed what I later called spiritual courage. And it was the courage of my mother to stand up against injustice out of love. And she recognized one of the men who broke into our home to drag my father off, as an Austrian Nazi, a young man who had once worked for the family business, and she got furious. She said, "How dare you do this to this man who has been so kind to you? I want my husband back." Now, she could have been killed. Many Jewish people were killed that night. But by a miracle, she wasn't. By a miracle, she did get my father back. And yes, some money did change hands that night. But that experience, and then fleeing in the middle of the night with my parents by train from Vienna, it really elicited in my mind some questions that have haunted me for most of my life, and that eventually did inspire my multidisciplinary, cross-cultural, transhistorical, which means including our prehistory, because we've been told the wrong story about, quote, human nature. And we're finding out from neuroscience, um, nonetheless, that it's a false story. But the questions were why, when we humans have, as I saw in my mother, such a capacity for caring, for love, really, for nonviolence, why has there been so much cruelty, so much insensitivity, so much violence? And these are the questions that led me, as I said, to my research. And I discovered something that really verifies what Einstein said, that you can't solve problems with the same thinking, with the same consciousness that created them.
It's remarkable to me. First of all, we just had a multicultural interfaith Kristallnacht commemoration on Sunday. And so really kind of a reflection of your work. There it is again, how you've impacted me. But what's striking to me is that on that night of broken glass, of brokenness, of broken lives, of broken hope, of all kinds of things, you somehow took the pieces and put them together and made wholeness.
It wasn't until much later, I have to say this, and I speak of cultural transformation. That's my work, which of course includes individual transformation, and it starts with a transformation of consciousness, of our awareness that there is a better alternative. But we can't really see this alternative through the lenses of the categories that actually we inherited: right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, capitalist, socialist. We inherited these from more authoritarian, more violent times. And so that's why, Einstein was so right, that what it takes, and it took me, and as you said, I eventually woke up as if from a long trance, really, to see, well, to first of all realize that the story of our past that we've been told, and about human nature, the if you will, that cartoon, right, that we are so often showed of the caveman dragging a woman by the hair with one hand and holding a club, a weapon, with another, which tells us it's always been that way, right? Violence, male dominance, that's just nature, divinely ordained, whatever. And that's how it has been and how it must always be. And I discovered that it's a lie. It's not true.
Two things. One is you talked about capitalism, socialism, dark, light, good, evil. So is part of the issue binary thinking, would you say?
Well, yes and no. these binaries
There's a binary.
that we're taught, that's binary, yeah, yes and no. And there is something in between, which is maybe, it can be. In what I call a domination system, we have in-group versus out-group thinking and acting. And it really doesn't matter whether it is well, take the Taliban or take fundamentalist Iran. They're Eastern and they're religious, right? But also take Western, more secular nations like, well, leftist, the former USSR under Stalin, or Putin's Russia, or Nazi Germany, which I had personal experience with. They all have this domination configuration. And yes, some of the aspects of what's marginalized. Remember, I said domestic violence, women, children. If you think about our categories, our conventional categories, they marginalize women and children and family. We don't really hear much about them, except in some fundamentalist religious categories. But then we're told, well, that's how it is, has to be rigidly controlled in the family, right? Women and children, with the male head of household being the one who does the controlling. The thing that I discovered were these configurations, and it's a continuum. It is a partnership domination scale. And the partnership alternative actually dates back to our prehistory. And so much of what is being published today confirms what I wrote about in The Chalice and the Blade. I mean, it is really amazing. Even DNA studies show that in our prehistory, there was this shift, and it was a shift brought about by violence, by one invasion after another of Indo-Europeans. It's really interesting because Hitler idealized the Aryans, the Indo-Europeans, and yes, they brought with them the domination configuration and gender and childhood, as I discovered later, and I'm being nonlinear here a little bit, because I have learned to focus through my research on 4 cornerstones that of either domination-oriented or partnership-oriented societies, and childhood and gender. Family, childhood, and gender are 2 of the cornerstones. And we are not taught to give them much importance, and certainly we're not taught to connect the dots. And that's what whole systems research does. It connects the dots of the whole social system.
Tell me if I got this right. A central idea in The Chalice and the Blade, and you've alluded to it here, is this lie about prehistory. And the lie is what we have now, we've always had. And what you say is, no, it isn't what we always had. We had a partnership, and it was in the form of a matriarchy, which was different. So tell me if I'm getting this right, different than a patriarchy. It wasn't that women had all the power and power over, but it was shared power. And that the invasion that you're talking about, the Europeans, was here were these people who had a peaceful society, and they were kind of sitting ducks.
Well, unfortunately, the term matriarchy, well, from my perspective, I don't use it because the term matriarchy as the opposite of patriarchy is not what it was. It was a partnership society. And what we see today, and by the way, two of the speakers at our summit were heads of the men's movement, because we have to change both the stereotype of, quote, femininity, but also the stereotype of, quote, masculinity. And notice how those pushing us back really want to reinstate those stereotypes.
Mhm.
And notice what importance all of the societies I mentioned that orient closely to domination, they pay really a lot of attention to gender roles and relations, and to childhood, to what families are supposed to be like. Uh, and I didn't give some examples of contemporary, because these are fairly contemporary, all of the examples I mentioned. But we also have examples of societies that have of fairly complex and technologically advanced societies, like Ireland, for example, has moved towards partnership in a very quick way. Uh, the uh, Nordic nations, and it's not because they're small and relatively homogeneous, because there are a lot of small, relatively homogeneous societies that orient very closely to domination. It's because they value caring, which is one of the really, it's coded feminine, right, in conventional thinking, domination thinking that we inherited, that some of the men in the men's movement are trying to change. They talk about caring men because it's a human characteristic. So a lot of these stories that we're told, we need to re-examine them and reconstruct them. And the re-examination is something that I'm still doing. Like I always knew, for example, that the Odyssey had clues to an earlier time, because they're very strong female figures. And of course, Odysseus, the hero, gets his power through a woman, Penelope, his wife. But the strong female figures are either monsters now, like the sirens who presumably eat men and sort of this, a monster, or they're just sexual objects for the male protagonist, who is a hero as killer. And I didn't realize that Homer was that the epics that we've so idealized, really, like the Odyssey and the Iliad, are really an idealization of the hero as killer, and that Homer was a prime propagandist for the domination system.
Do you think that the reason, for example, this administration is so focused on trans people and non-binary people is because this is flying in the face of these rigid gender roles?
Absolutely. I mean, but we have to understand something about the current regression. It didn't just come out of no place. There were two major factors. One is rapid technological change, but the other, and really ignored factor, is that this regression came as a reaction to organized social movement, one after the other, for the last 300 years, during this time of really when the Industrial Revolution went into high gear. Look, first the challenge to and they all challenged the same thing, domination. I mean, the so-called, the first challenge was the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their subjects. Then came the feminist movement, challenging again the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule the women and children in the quote castles of their homes. Then came the abolitionists, civil rights, Black Lives Matter movement, challenging another tradition of domination, the so-called divinely ordained right of a quote superior race to rule over an inferior one. The movement for peace, challenging the violence, because what keeps and we see this in the regression today, fear and force. That's what keeps that system going. That's what holds it together. But all the way to the environmental movement, really, challenging, again, the so-called divinely ordained right we have of dominion. Man has the dominion over everything that moves on this earth. I mean, this is pure domination nonsense. And it's bound to take us to an evolutionary dead end.
Yes.
Because we're all interconnected, not only by technologies of transportation and communication, but by technologies of destruction, nuclear weapons, and more slowly by the extraction that went into high gear as the Industrial Revolution, continued, really of climate change, for goodness sakes. And one of the characteristics of the traumatized, because domination systems are trauma factories. And one of the characteristics of this system is that they create trauma starting in families. That's why we held the summit, because we needed to show that so-called domestic violence, or what I call family violence, normalizes violence before our brains are fully formed, for goodness sakes. And that there is a ripple effect, isn't there, of the acceptance of war, of terrorism, of crime as just the way things are. And it's not necessary, and it certainly is not human nature.
So it makes sense that the prehistory that you discovered and that's been confirmed be covered up because it's another narrative and
Absolutely. So
dangerous to a domination model.
very dangerous, and that's why the fourth cornerstone is story and language. But notice how terms like empowering have crept into our language, and you can't have empowering power. But the chalice and the blade are really two symbols of power, aren't they? The blade is power over, again, that's crept into our language. I mean, there are partnership trends in our language, but we really have to be aware, conscious, that there is another and much better alternative. And that, as I said, even technologically advanced, highly populated nations can, and certainly we see trends towards this. I mean, because the third cornerstone, it's family and childhood, there's gender, but the third cornerstone is economics. And I wrote a book about that, The Real Wealth of Nations, calling for a caring economics of partnerism. Because, we don't give any real value in either socialism or capitalism to the the work that both Marx and Smith called reproductive, right? Rather than productive, which is the work of caring for people starting at birth and caring for our natural life support system, our Mother Earth.
What would a partnership society, in kind of more concrete terms, what would it look like?
Well, we really don't know exactly, but one thing we do know for sure is that it would have a different economic system, one that no longer marginalizes or just ignores like our like GDP and GNP ignores the quote reproductive work of the three life-sustaining sectors for both Marx and Smith, for both socialism and capitalism, the natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. So we would have different economic indicators. And we did try to change that by and you can find out about that, about our social wealth economic indicators at our website, centerforpartnership.org. The social wealth economic indicators that show a correlation between how much a society invests, because it doesn't just give us a snapshot like other GDP alternatives of what is. But it also looks at what kinds of investments we need to make. And the investments we need to make are so much into caring for people, starting at birth and caring for nature. And we found, for example, in the first iteration of these social wealth economic indicators, that it makes sense. Of course, the United States invests less in families support than any other developed nation and has the highest infant mortality rate, the highest child poverty rate, and the highest maternal mortality rate of any developed nations. So the correlations are there. We just have to connect the dots.
What you're saying is that the family is kind of the building block of all of this.
Absolutely. The family is a building block and gender is a building block.
Yes.
I didn't answer your question.
So there are two questions. One is, how do we then, if the family is a building block and it's foundational, how do we change families? That's one question. And the other thing is, would you speak a little bit about the study that was done of the families in Germany, the Nazi? Yeah, okay.
But first, let me go back to the question you asked me about why is there so much emphasis on trans people, and trans and queer, quote unquote, people. I hate that term. I wish they had picked something else. But, instead of taking, a term that was derogative, really. But you have to have rigid gender stereotypes to rank male and masculine over feminine and female. If you don't have those rigid gender stereotypes, you can't rank them. And we're seeing, of course, that there is gender fluidity. And we don't only see this with homosexual and lesbian and, transgender people, but we see that there is flexibility in women and in men. Women can be leaders and men can be caring. And we see that in all the young men, for example, mostly young, but some are older, who are diapering babies, feeding babies, doing what used to be oh, no, real men don't do that, right? That's not masculine. Well, that's nonsense, you know? But to get back to your two other questions, every one of us can change our families. And it starts really with a change in consciousness. What do we model and what do we value? And if a child grows up in a family where the quote women's work, right, of caring for people, for everybody, really, not just for children, but for the sick, for the elderly, for everybody, is considered something inferior. They internalize this in-group versus out-group thinking right there of equating difference with inferiority or superiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving. And then they apply this in-group versus out-group model. So it's all interconnected. And interconnection is really, it's so interesting. I've become, mysticism always talks about spirituality, always talks about interconnection. And it's at the core of all of our religious traditions, isn't it? But then there's this overlay of domination teachings. Women are inferior, women are, dangerous to men. Even the Jungian archetypes, I mean, think about the animus and the anima. The animus is, active, right? But the anima is either man's temptation or man's inspiration, has no ego, no identity, nothing. And so part of our job, and now is to jump from family, what we can do in family, is to model partnership and teach partnership and value partnership. Because it isn't, equity is not sameness. Equality is not sameness. On the contrary, it is valuing difference. And lo and behold, we see how now we can't value difference, right? That has to be exit. There's a very good reason for that, isn't there? And there's a very good reason for the focus on gender. If you want a rigid domination system, you better focus on gender, and you better focus on controlling what children are exposed to, which is another part of what we're being taught right now. So you have to have a frame, and the people pushing us back to more rigid domination have a frame. And we have all of these movements, the economic equity movement, again, challenging domination economics, whether it's an Arab chieftain or a Indian pasha or a Chinese emperor or a feudal lord or neoliberalism, which is neither new nor liberal, right? It's trickle-down economics, and they're all trickle-down economics. And we're supposed to identify and deny that those on top, be it in families or in the economic arena, are causing us pain. And it doesn't have to be this way. We have a partnership alternative. But you asked, what do we do? And family is one arena where every one of us can do something. But every one of us can use our voices. And we can read. And we can inform ourselves. And then we can talk to our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, and spread this consciousness that there is a better alternative, not perfect, because we're really sort of flying the airplane while we're building it, right? But So that's why I can't tell you exactly what the system will look like. But I know one thing, the economic system will reward caring much more in the market, and it will also find some way of rewarding it in families outside of the market.
Hmm.
Because we have, look, a bank is an economic invention, slavery was an economic invention, right? We
Mhm.
partnership economic inventions. And every one of us has the creativity to
Hmm.
do that.
Hmm. Yeah, if the family is the building block, it's the opposite of trickle down. It's bottom up, not bottom in terms of less important, but it's from the ground up. Would you say a word about that study, the Nazi family of the German families?
Forgot about that. Well, there, see, we are getting this information, it's bombarding us, but it's bits and pieces. And what my work does is connect it because it has a frame. So this study found that Hitler made it very clear, the Nazis, well, they called the emancipation of women, by the way, a Jewish plot. You know, the Jew has taken from us this, you know, the services of women, right? I mean, everything was the Jew's fault, of course. It always has to have a scapegoat, you know, whether it's an immigrant or whether it's a Jew or whether it's a Black person. Whether it's a Shiite or whether it's a Sunni, depending on which you adhere to. It's always an out group. But this study found that women, because a lot of women are brainwashed and terrorized really into internalizing this notion that there are only two alternatives. You either dominate and you're dominated, and women just aren't supposed to dominate, right? Finished. And the Nazis taught mothers not to respond to their children's distress. They were supposed to, well, but that was the wisdom when I was, a mother of young children. Even Spock said, let them cry it out. We've inherited this. And now experts are telling us, well, there's a difference between authoritarian and yes, violent parenting, and spanking is violence. And our parents didn't invent this, they were just passing it on. I mean, you know, this is not a matter of shame or blame. None of it is, just as it isn't a matter of women against men or men against women. Men in domination systems have to give nothing less than their lives because some guy on top of the hierarchy, like a Putin, wants more real estate, right? But they get a sop. They're king of the castle of their home. Yeah, it's a very interesting.
It's very interesting. We, I could talk to you all, but let me ask you this. Uh, in the Chalice and the Blade, um, this stuck with me, and I read it when you first wrote it, so, you know, almost 40 years ago, right? Um, you talk about the snake, and it seems to me it was such a metaphor for the propaganda, for all that. Do you know what I'm talking about? This, how the snake gets thought of
But
as.
I was a very curious kid. And my parents actually hired a rabbi to teach me I'm Jewish because, I mean, as if I needed to know this after what had happened, because they sent me at first to a private, my mother sold the jewelry she could get out, you know, to send me to private schools. I mean, education, you know, that was a big thing always. But Mr. Munoz, who was the director of this Methodist school, always asked who believes in Jesus Christ. And I got tired of not raising my hand. So they hired this rabbi. And this poor man who was a refugee, crazy, because first of all, I wanted to know, not just about the snakes, that came later, but I wanted to know, in the Bible, it says, henceforth, woman shall be subservient to man, after the so-called fall, quote unquote, all due to women, women are bad. And I wanted to know, well, what was it like before the henceforth? And nobody wanted to talk about that because nobody knew. Well, I mean, Chalice and the Blade answers that to some extent, except there was no Garden of Eden um, in that sense. And well, anyway. But the other thing was the snake. I couldn't understand why a woman would ask advice from a snake, because we usually don't do that. And then in the course of my research for the Chalice and the Blade into prehistoric art, uh, I discovered that the snake was not only a symbol of the regeneration of life, but also a symbol of oracular prophecy. And that even in historic times, after the shift to domination, the Oracle of Delphi was a woman, a priestess, a pythoness, working with a snake, a python. And do you remember those Minoan figurines with the snakes coiled around their arms?
Yeah.
They worked, and they were in oracular trances, of course. So
We just lost your beautiful face.
old tradition. We did. I don't know why that happens, but I will get you back my face.
Okay. We need it. We need your face.
There, I'm trying to. There, I'm back.
Oh, there you go. Okay, thank you.
There, I'm back. But I mean, so many um, that I mean, my life is really like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, because at that same school, at this Methodist school, there was a Mrs. Kirby who taught about prehistory. And I was fascinated. I mean, she didn't teach that, she just said there was such a thing as prehistory, for as far as I can remember. But many years later, I was fascinated by so-called mystery cults of antiquity. Christianity was, of course, a mystery cult, and it won because this is one win-lose system here that we already had. It won out, but there was Mithraism, big competitor, and there was also the cult of Demeter and Persephone. And here was a goddess with such power. I mean, power to make the winter, the time when Persephone had to go into the underworld, so to speak. It was fascinating, but where I had to go? I had to go into the locked up archives of the library, of the public library.
Wow.
And I I still can't figure out why they were locked out. But again, we were not supposed to meddle with that.
And in the Chalice and the Blade, you also make the point that most snakes are not poisonous, most snakes are not slimy, but that was the propaganda about them because of what they represented.
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's like a microcosm of a greater, anything you don't like, you make up stories about, and then people are afraid of it, and people think they're evil, and people think, yeah,
Well, I
dangerous.
the trauma and with it denial are really built into domination systems. And it starts again in the family, because how can a child not deny that the people that they are dependent upon for food, for shelter, for life are causing them pain? They have to believe that the fault of all their problems lies with someone else, a woman, certainly. And that's a crazy story because we all have mothers. Even the experts that tell us this have mothers. I mean, but
Well,
gender has been submerged and is so vividly visible in the regression if you really look for it.
yes. I think if it's okay with you, we'll open it up to questions and then for another, like for 10 minutes or so. And then the final thing, if you would be for an hour, we're looking at your beautiful smiling face. And so if you at the end could tell us why we should feel hope, that would be great. So is it okay? So we'll go to some questions from the floor and then, okay. Thank you so much. You are just a blessing. So Jamil and Deb, I saw you first, I think, and then Jamil.
Yeah, I put in the chat two links. One is a book about how the United Nations accounting system does not include women. And if it did, the GDP of the African countries would be much higher than it is. It was written by, oh, I've forgotten the name, but it's in the chat. And I read it, oh, maybe 5 or 7 years ago when I was just working with my family. And I was impressed that the whole United Nations accounting system, which most nations adopt or at least use, does not include women at all.
This is
And she wrote a whole book on it. It's in the chat. The other thing in the chat was I put uh, Riane Eisler's partnership link, the link to her website, I believe. So,
You.
um,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for both of these links. And they're both things that we can have an input to. You can certainly find out much more about this work by going to this website, looking at some of the short articles, getting some of the books, but also you can have an input into the United Nations. I mean, it isn't just sending a letter to the Women's Committee. It's really just bombarding them with letters saying, have you looked at, because you have to give people a better alternative. I mean, that is the thing. So send them to the social wealth economic indicators, which you can find, as I said, if it is a place where you can enter the social wealth economic indicators and you get the website and just send it to them and say, how about that? Need to change this.
Jamil.
Thank you for taking my question. One thing that I was wondering is I began to kind of like begin to question a lot of things during the pandemic when it seemed like a lot of decisions were being made based in this hierarchical fashion that wasn't responsive to the needs of the greatest number of people. And so I wonder, how does study of hierarchy interact with some of the work that you've done and your opinions on how to make things more cooperative and equitable?
Well, the hierarchy, we needed a different words, and I had to coin, because look, every society needs parents, it needs teachers, it needs someone to make decisions, managers, leaders, but there's a difference between hierarchies of domination, okay? And that's what we're talking about, a hierarchy of domination. And we've inherited that in what I call the domination system. But there are also hierarchies of actualization where power is more the power of the chalice, to give life, to nurture life, to illuminate life. And that really is something that both men and women can do, and everybody in between. How do we think of power? So I highly recommend that you maybe start with the Chalice and the Blade, and then read. I mean, I've written so many books, but we have to change the economic reward system. If we don't, and this is why I really want to have our next summit, our next virtual summit, to be on economics, because we need partnership economic inventions. So I encourage you to just immerse yourself in some of this information that about our past, our present, and our potential future, which I write about, because our job is to really show that there is a better alternative and that we can create it.
Anybody else? Thank you, Jamal. Anybody else have a question?
Well, let's see, Shawnee writes, in the shamanic tradition, we are reminded that a snake is one of the few animals that sheds its skin in order to grow. And it is precisely that renewal that we have to think about, and that was very central from what we can infer. And of course, art is a kind of a symbolic language, isn't it? And the art of the Paleolithic and the early Neolithic is not about men killing. It is really about giving life, maintaining life. And the cover art for the chalice, for the chalice and the blade for the book, is a bird goddess, and she's phallic in shape but has breasts. So it's the unity and interconnection of the two basic forms of humanity, women and men. But she is also she's a bird goddess. It's our interconnection with nature. And again, we see that. We see so many vulvas in the old art that were simply ignored and are still being ignored by archaeologists. I mean, they used to call them indeterminate marks when they were clearly a vulva carved in the Paleolithic. And these many figurines of women, of females, with a clearly etched vulva. They were not dolls, as some of the archaeologists still to this day maintain. But just think of the so-called Venus of LaSalle. She is not portable, which a doll is, of course. And she's carved at the entrance of a cave sanctuary, and in one hand she's got a crescent moon with 13 notches, which are the lunar cycles, but also the cycles of women's menstrual cycles. And with the other hand, she's pointing to a clearly etched vulva. I mean, the language of art is something that we have to really learn. And we don't see any huge statues like we do later of Zeus, for example, you know. I mean, with just these tiny little figures crawling around at the bottom of the statue. No, we just don't see any of that. I mean, you have to really wake up, and you can smell some of the roses that way.
I have a question. This is such a dangerous time to be offering alternatives, and you talked about that. You know, that the domination model has to get rid of all the proof of any other model that ever existed, and squash all the people who are suggesting an alternative way. So have you experienced backlash?
Well, I'm sure that I have, but I really don't pay much attention to it. Because look, I mean, of course, people who have been brainwashed into thinking that there are only two alternatives, you either dominate or you're dominated. And usually they're traumatized people. But we're all to a certain extent traumatized, you know. And that's something that our economic poverty is traumatizing. Racism is traumatizing, anti-Semitism is traumatizing. I can testify to that. So I think that my calling, and it is a calling, because you asked me about my life, and the first part of my life, I just desperately wanted to fit in. And I tried in my first marriage to be the, you know, the woman behind the great man, right? That was the thing that you were supposed to be, and I couldn't be.
Hmm.
And then I had the incredible good fortune of meeting my unfortunately deceased second husband, David Loy. And those 45 years showed me, well, it showed me many things, but it showed me that even on a personal level, partnership is much better than domination. And he was, I mean, yes, he was a very amazing and extraordinary man. He wrote many books, including books about Darwin, by the way, who he wrote, for example, in Rediscovering Darwin or in Darwin's Lost Theory, that Darwin has been used in David Loy's words as an 800-pound gorilla for the domination system. But David did a search in Darwin's book on human evolution, The Descent of Man, and what he found that he only used the term survival of the fittest twice, and once to apologize for using it.
Oh, wow.
Love, something like about 30 times. And got him wondering whether anybody had ever really read Darwin's second book, where Darwin says, and now I'm going to talk about man's human, you know, he was a creature of his time, evolution. And it's mostly cultural evolution.
Mm.
So we were very aligned, and I had really a resource in David, who was a PhD sociologist, social psychologist. So I had him, and my training, the first job I had out of school was with the Systems Development Corporation, which was an offshoot of the Rand Corporation, and it introduced me to systems work. And it was very, I mean, it was just the word because they left out women and children, but the concept was there. And then I'm an attorney, of course, by training, and going to law school also taught me systems analysis, because think about it for a moment. A client doesn't come into your office and says, apply section 1222 of the blank code to my case. They tell you a story, and it's up to the attorney to figure out what the law is. So you have to really learn how to do systems analysis. And having David as a resource was wonderful for me. And he encouraged me, he respected me, and we had a true partnership.
Riane, I can't thank you enough for this amazing evening. And so if it's okay with you, we'll return to that, or the question I mentioned before to end with. Do you think that we should feel hope? And if so, why?
Well, I think, first of all, that we're at a level of technology where we now have nuclear bombs, which could destroy us all in an instant. And of course, the mix of high technology with the domination system is taking us to climate change, and now AI and goodness knows what, if it's programmed for domination. I mean, we have every reason to be afraid to rely on AI if it's programmed for domination. But if it's programmed for partnership, it can be our helper. And again, these are human decisions. And we can't make them unless we know that there is another choice in dominating or being dominated. So our job is to use, I mean, look, everything around us is a human creation. I mean, the desk, the computer, the house, and our cultures. And cultures can change, they have changed, and we can change it again. So our job is to show that there is a better alternative. And yes, we really need to pay special attention to moving these four cornerstones from domination to partnership, family and childhood, because we know from neuroscience that what children experience and observe, and as you said, it ripples out. As the summit showed that we had peace begins at home, it ripples out from that. And yes, it is very important. Gender, it is not just a women's issue. It is a really primary organizing principle for families, for economics. I mean, remember what I said about both Marx and Smith? They perpetuated what I call a system of gendered values, in which there's always money, you know, for weapons, for wars. But somehow there isn't enough money for caring for children, for nurturing children. I mean, this is reality stood upside down, as I write in The Chalice and the Blade. So, and of course, story and language, and we can all change our stories. We can all change the current story and say, but have you thought, you know, of the Odyssey and what is it really teaching us? It kind of makes killing heroic, doesn't it? And it does devalue the female, the women, all these figures. You know, the Iliad starts with a moral question of whether the hero or the warrior should get the spoils of war, who happens to be a woman. And there isn't a word about the moral issue of what in the heck does she think? How does she feel? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, and that's how that book starts. And of course, it blames a woman, Helen, for the Trojan War. I mean, it's all of one piece, and we've got to connect the dots. So, yes, I have hope, and it is an existential commitment. domination systems are not adaptive, especially at our level of technological development. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Evelyn just wrote something.
Gabriel Moran taught about the power of language. He also taught that the leader can come from the circle when certain gifts are needed, and thus all are equal. I focus on using non-sexist language when reading scripture. Well, that's so good. And that is a partnership trend. See, what we don't understand is that the regression that we're seeing is largely in reaction to the movement towards partnership.
You know what? That's very true. That's a really good point.
And we have to make people understand that all these movements are really moving towards a partnership system of interconnection.
It has been such an honor, a delight, a privilege to be with you tonight and to listen to you and to learn from you. And God bless you for your work. We need you now more than ever. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really.
And
Just
thank you for everything. And we will talk some more about the next summit.
yes, we will.
Find out about the current summit at peacebeginsathome.org.
Yes.
No, it's Peace Begins at Home Summit. Don't forget the summit.
Summit.
Summit. Yes, period.org. Peace Begins at Home Summit.org.
Thank you for your work and thank you for being with us. And everyone, thank you for coming tonight. It was just a pleasure to be with you also. Blessings, love to you, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy, bye.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
Thank
bye,
you.
everyone.